you. Well, I'm sorry I'm not from the Edelman Trust, but there we are. I'm a colleague of Julian's. If I can try and justify why I'm here, maybe. It's a varied background that's brought me here. I started out life as a civil engineer, and I worked for local government in the UK for a couple of years after graduating, and also worked for my holidays. So that was my first taste of the public sector. Then I became an accountant, and when I qualified, I went to work for what's now part of the Price Waterhouse sort of empire of accountants, and I was seconded into their public sector division, where I spent a few happy months helping to audit local government accounts and civil service accounts. And I must say, I found them utterly confusing. I've been schooled in accruals accounting and so on, and trying to understand that actually we're not interested in accruals, we just do cash accounting. And I thought, and anyway, it struck me as quite extraordinary, but it was a different approach. And now I haven't really followed the accounting sort of reforms that have taken place in the public sector that much, but I know a lot's happened, and it's not just about cash accounting anymore. Okay, so then I became a group financial controller and company secretary of a couple of public companies in the UK, and then around about 1990 I thought I'd had enough of working for other people, so I had to go trying to work for everyone, basically self-employed, but you end up working for everyone by being self-employed. And I spent most of my time actually working for the National Health Service, which is another public sector body, which is, in a way is run more like private companies and publicly listed companies and local authorities and the public, and government is run. There's a lot in common. You have boards in the normal way, and the accounts actually that hospitals used to produce or health authorities to produce looked actually quite familiar to someone schooled in from the private sector. I spent my time trying to help audit teams do better jobs and try and help the NHS as a centre trying to improve its approaches to risk management and corporate governance and how to assess control. Fascinating stuff, and I did that for about 10 years, but after a while I realised that the NHS, in order to change, you've really got to want to change, and the NHS wasn't really one of those organisations that wanted to change, and I think after a while I thought I was wasting my time. So then I came to ACCA. I've been here for 12 years now, and in that time I have become more global. I've been to Pakistan a couple of times, I've been to Uganda a couple of times, and ACCA has sent me all over the place, which has been fascinating. Luckily, it sends Gillian all over the place these days rather than me, so I get the chance to stay at home and think, which I found very useful. And that's what I want to talk about, really, is some of the thinking that I've been doing, with the help of people like Michael, whom I've known for probably at least 10 years, I should think. And I've been very fortunate working for ACCA to have actually known people like Michael, a great bunch of people to exchange ideas from. And the paper I want to talk about, in a way, it's I suppose it's about the accumulation of sort of 10 or 12 years of thinking about things and a lifetime before that. And the paper that we're about to launch, it's a consultation, and it's called Creating Value Through Governance, and the subtitle, Towards a New Accountability. And we'll be launching it as a consultation, and I'm hoping that we'll get lots of feedback from people like you and others between now and the end of June, when we're going to issue an even better paper. And this one is only 30,000 words long. The new one I'm hoping will be at least double that. And everyone is really going to want to read it, and it'll be on all the airport bookshelves, the airport shop bookshelves, and people are going to pick it up and pay good money for it. That's my hope. So it's written primarily for private sector, but there's an awful lot of it is relevant to the public sector, and particularly to public accounting. And because one of the things that we kind of talk about in the paper is actually, well, what is money? What's debt? What does it mean for us? What actually causes economic growth? How do we recognise it? How do we measure growth? I'd argue that the measures we have for growth are awful. They tend to measure the wrong things and don't measure the right things, and so on. In terms of trust, Now, we can spend ages talking about what creates trust, and most of them you can think of off the top of your head. But the key word for me, I think, in relation to us as accountants is relevance. Now, I think it goes without saying, hopefully, that as accountants, when we produce accounts, we'll do it with sincerity and honesty and all that. So that goes without saying. What I think is missing from accounting generally is relevance. So this is a bit philosophical now, but actually, why do we do accounts? But let's start with why do we do corporate governance? Because it's a newer thing, it's an easier one to think about. Because we've been doing accounts for so long, we don't really think about why we do it. We just do it. But with governance, it's a relatively new concept. It's really only been going strong for the last 20 years or so. And I've been doing governance, for probably 40 years, but I didn't know it was governance until 20 years ago. Now everything's governance. Anyway, so the purpose of governance. If you look in governance codes, you're not really going to find much enlightenment about what it's for. And you'll probably end up thinking, as many people do, that what governance is about, it's about complying with codes, complying with requirements and so on. And that becomes the reason for doing it. And as a result, we seem to have created a bit of a governance monster, where an awful lot of people spend an awful lot of time and cost a lot of money doing stuff around compliance of codes that I'd say, by and large, is completely irrelevant to and arguably detrimental to creating value. Now, we also talk about what value is in the paper, and one can be philosophical about this too. Value, in a private sector sense, I would say is about economic value, but it's also, and you were talking about integrated reporting earlier, I think, and it's about social value and environmental value. And so you've heard this before in the previous session. I'm sorry I missed that. But I think that it's very important to think about that. And I think what governance is about is creating value. Now, in the public sector, there's this interesting thing. Now, do we actually spend value that's being created by others, or do we create value ourselves? Now, it's a popular conception amongst perhaps some of the right-wing press that we have in this country and in America and so on, that the public sector is basically a load of parasites who are basically living off the wealth created by the private sector. I don't buy that idea at all. I think it's absolute nonsense. And